The reason why I'm taking him so much is he's getting drafted kind of after those running backs that I like. He's getting drafted in an area where, like, I often am grabbing maybe that 5th or 6th wide receiver, because after him, there's also a bit of a teardrop at the wide receiver. So it's not only just the player, but I'm probably ending up with him a lot because, hey, that's a pocket of the draft where I want to grab wide receiver. I think it's the end of a tier, etc.
4 players Justin can't stop drafting. That is what we're going to talk about today on the RotoViz Fantasy Football Show. We all, each and every season, have players that we love. It is tricky. We talked a little bit earlier this week about, keeping your exposures to certain limits. Once you're starting to get up over those 30%, to start to do some checks and balances. We're going to talk about some players that Justin Herzig, who's joining me today, may be doing those checks and balances on, as he cannot stop drafting them this season. We're obviously going to talk, mainly looking here through a best ball lens. And again, we did talk about knowing the website, the format, and so on that show earlier this week. So do check that out after you finish here today. But Justin, thanks for joining me yet again. Before we get into the players' names, when you're looking at players at this point of the offseason, I know we've been drafting for quite a bit, the NFL draft, we've gone through prospect season and all of that. What are some of the things that you're looking at that then leads you into situations that you feel that you can't stop drafting? Is that like a mispriced in ADP versus what your rankings would be? Is it a case that, just the player profile has such high upside? Where are you basing that on from the early point?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is based off just where I'm seeing or thinking something different in the market, because you have a lot of kind of great companies out there that are putting out projections, putting out rankings, and those rankings are usually built by pretty solid projections. So it's hard to actually have like, hey, crazy gaps between kind of rankings from a projection standpoint. But I think when you take market sentiment, especially on things that are more relatively unknown, maybe we didn't see as much last year, that's where you get the value. And so for me, it's kind of just, I'm just jumping in the drafts and just doing a lot of drafts and seeing like, okay, here's where I have stands on players. Here's where I feel like there's opportunities. And you start seeing just those players continually hit my lineups. And then I start doing the assessment for, hey, how do I feel about this? What's my confidence level? And do I, want to keep going?
And this is something that you'll probably reveal over the coming picks. But when you're looking at those players that are mispriced this year, do you find much of is it mainly young players, or is it a case that you find that veterans are tending to be mispriced in 2025?
I think you get a blend. I mean, it's hard to say, like, I think rookies are mispriced just because the current market is just so
they've got so much more expensive over the last 5 years. But again, that's just the evolution of people absorbing the content and buying into those things.
Yep, for sure. So I think when we think of upside, it's probably worth kind of breaking this down a little, but a lot of people, when they think of upside, they just think of, okay, what is the upside case? What does it look like when that player hits? And you think through and you're like, hey, this player could definitely win the starting job. And if they win the starting job, we know how valuable, like RJ Harvey is a good example. We can think through okay, we know how valuable the Denver backfield is. It's an ascending team. Bo Nix is bringing that offense stronger. And then we saw that, there's such a just crap show last year with the split. Hey, RJ Harvey can take that. Okay, cool. So a lot of people draft for his upside is he could be like a top 5, top 10 running back. What I think from an upside people are not considering often is, okay, well, what is the actual likelihood of hitting that? And so when we think through the upside, we should be thinking, okay, likelihood of hitting it, multiply that by the actual value when it hits, and that should give us our upside scenario. And I think for the rookies, people are really good at kind of telling themselves a story of what that value is when it does hit. I think people are a little less good at actually assessing what is the likelihood of it. And it's difficult too, because for best ball, we really do just care about when they do hit it because of, hey, it's such a high upside kind of contest. And you want to play for those, hey, outlier examples. But when you're taking a whole bunch of these outliers in the same team, a whole bunch of these kind of iffy scenarios, even if one does hit, you might have busted your team too much with the others. So there is a balance aspect.
Yeah, the part with the upside, or I guess doing, telling yourself the story of how it works out, is you also have to do, like you're mentioning, the possibility and the range of outcomes of how it doesn't work out. Like the RJ Harvey conversation very quickly has gone from RJ Harvey is going to be the starter to RJ Harvey's in trouble because they signed J.K. Dobbins. And the reality is probably a little bit different to that, where the guys behind RJ Harvey are in a lot of trouble, and it's going to be a split between the two, and they can both still have success at ADPs based on that. But the other part of that, I feel like, is people get too sure on the scenarios of bad teams and good teams, and the good teams can only stay good and the bad teams can only stay bad. And the that is another part of like when we're trying to be humble enough to draft these teams and know that we will be wrong in certain situations, is trying to see where the market is also potentially wrong on those, but having that understanding. But when you get into those checks and balances then, and then you still like that player, that's where we get into this list of Justin's top 4 guys that he can't stop drafting. So when we look at the first wide receiver, and maybe we'll do a little bit of devil's advocate, and we'll maybe tell the story of the upside and the downside for these players as we work our way through it. But we're going to start off with a wide receiver. Who's your favorite wide receiver to draft this year?
Right now, it is Rashid Shaheed. And so for Rashid Shaheed, I think he's got a few things going for him. Last year with that injury, like people didn't actually see, I don't think people remember how hot of a start he got off to. And so I think yeah, it was fantastic. And I think he would have been one of those kind of, hey, break the season type wide receivers had he stayed healthy. But we kind of look at the situational aspect for, hey, from a talent wise, I think he actually has a lot of strong talent. I think he has a diverse route tree, even though he usually has that typical high A dot. And can be a burner over the top, which is, hey, great from an underdog, a half PPR scoring wise. From this year, what his role is, it is pretty clear that this is going to be a concentrated offense. I mean, you've got Chris Olave, you've got Rashid Shaheed. After that, your wide receivers are like Bub Means. I think Brandon Cooks is still there. It's abysmal depth chart behind there. Kamara is going to get his eat too. Taysom Hill's probably not even healthy enough. So like, pretty clear he's going to have the volume. He's going to have the role. I think he has the talent. The big question mark and the reason why people aren't drafting him, I think, are kind of twofold. One is, the Saints are going to be a dumpster fire. And two, like, can we really trust Tyler Shuck to actually be delivering him the ball? But like, it was Derek Carr before. We were really excited about that. Like, can it really be that much of a downgrade? And what helps is they actually have a really strong offensive line they've invested in this year. And when you look at their opponents in the NFC South, you've got 6 games that are probably going to be shootouts between Panthers, Falcons, Bucks. I'm expecting you also, obviously you have the dome aspect, but I'm expecting this team to be throwing a lot. They didn't invest much in the running back position, so it's not like they're going to go to a ground and pound game behind this offensive line. So I just think there's a lot of ways that Shaheed can not only surpass his value from where he's being drafted, which is somewhere around like, I think top of the head is like 10th round or so.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, hey, he can still on an individual game basis, but with his speed, his over the top, his A dot, actually have some huge weeks.
So he started the season last year with 4 of the first 5 weeks prior to his injury in week 6 with 16 points or more in 4 of those 5 games. And, he's in the high teens across the board. Was getting a lot of success though on those deep shots. And that was kind of the surprising element as to how Derek Carr and him were like. I drafted quite a bit of Chris Olave last year, and his season obviously ravaged by injury. But there was the kind of thing like you're watching these games and there was no connection, no sync between Derek Carr and Chris Olave, but it seemed to be like every throw was like a 40-yard bomb when it was going the way of Rashid Shaheed. So obviously a quarterback change there in the picture. And the other part, just to highlight it, something that I mentioned in one of the RotoViz Overtime podcasts recently, is we tend to look, because of say Madden and games like that, these players get injured but they just come back. And we've seen like over the last couple of years, like sports science has improved a lot, sports medicine, people are coming back. But I do think that Adrian Peterson may have kind of ruined it for everybody in terms of how he came back so quick and stayed so healthy when he came back from his knee injury. Any concerns around, full recovery and potential, less high-end athletic performance from Shaheed coming back from this paired with the quarterback situation? Because I do think they fit everything that we touched on in the last show, but like the ugly team that people are undervaluing simply because it's not an attractive place to draft players from. But that also means if the market is wrong and that the upside could be huge. I'm more concerned about the QB situation than the injury situation, because it did happen, as I mentioned, quite early. But we are still looking at somebody who at the start of the season is going to be, less than 12 months from pretty serious injury.
Yeah, I think the reports have been pretty positive. Obviously something we want to continue to monitor, but not something that I'm currently baking into any kind of just kind of negs as a result of that. I think, with the team aspect. And I think there's 2 aspects from a drafting standpoint with the team. One is there's the, hey, I don't have confidence in this team, so I think he should be devalued. And then there's the second is, I don't have confidence in who the quarterback is, so I'm not grabbing him because I don't know who to stack him with. If the example is, let's say Tyler Shuck is actually named the day 1 starter, that doesn't change our outlook on the team at all. But what it does change is people's confidence in stacking him. And I think even just that naming will probably move Shaheed up a half a round or so, just because people are like, hey, okay, I can take this wide receiver and know I can back stack him later on. And I want to make sure I get as many stacks as possible. So I think there is just some immediate value from that standpoint too.
You just reminded me of something that I did mean to slide into that previous show as well when we were talking about the stacking, and it's just drafting players in general with ADP moves, positive or negative, in terms of like trying to manage your percentages. And like if you're drafting a player now, based on news, you're hoping to get, as we get closer to the season, and then that happens and the player jumps, from the 10th round to the 8th round, or else the player is having fumbling issues like maybe a tooting and he's drops down the opposite way. Is there anything that listeners should do in terms of trying to manage portfolios from that aspect?
Yeah, I think it's got to be rather extreme for me to really take into account. Like I'm thinking maybe a few years back, Cam Akers, I think toward the ACL in preseason. So Darrell Henderson jumped from 14th rounder to like a 4th rounder.
Yeah.
In that situation, yeah, I'm probably fading the Darrell Henderson purely because the gap between that 14th and 4th, where if Darrell Henderson has a huge year, I'm still behind the 8 ball and all those teams that were taking him in the 14th round. Something like a 10th to an 8th, that doesn't really do much for me. If someone is crazily dropping from like a 5th to a, 15th, yes, you can say like, hey, I'm going to take the chance on him because in the situation it's right. You've got a major edge on those 8% of teams that were drafting him earlier. But historically, we've also seen that usually when a player's dropping substantially, that the market is actually not dropping them enough, and that there is, valid reason for it, whether it's injury, whether it's role, etc. So for me, I would say I'm still drafting even if the player moves up, because usually there's a reason why that player's moved up, but players often move up more than they should just because of a hype, the upside thing we're talking about. When players fall, they usually don't fall as much as they should.
Yeah, and this was also more so to the fact of like the players that you're drafting at that high end of like 25 to 30%. So if it's a case that you're already high, that's probably a good chance to maybe pare back on the exposure because you're having to pay extra cost. But the part I kind of sometimes find tough is if you like a player and he tends to slide the other way, is like not continuing to want to draft him at those particular situations. But yeah, it's this is the time, if you, particularly with young players, I find drafting now as we talk here in June, but if you're drafting over those previous couple of months, even in May, drafting players at that point because you're saying the market's wrong and baking it in, so you're not having to pay those prices down the line and being able to put together those unique combinations. I think getting in on the merit is the way to play it. Moving now to the running back position, and it's intriguing. You went for a guy in the 10th round. I'm interested to see if we continue on kind of mid to late round picks or if we're going to get up to the top of the board. And I guess a question where we're on that, if we have a guy as we go through, maybe we'll get to it, is when you have those players at the top of the board, is there a concern for you having high exposures and continuing to draft players where you're adding additional capital more so than when we get into the mid to late rounds?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question with regards to the Shaheed aspect too. And probably a reason why I'm taking him so much is from a draft pocket area, he's getting drafted kind of after those running backs that I like. He's getting drafted in an area where like I often am grabbing maybe that 5th or 6th wide receiver, because after him, there's also a bit of a teardrop at the wide receiver. So it's not only just the player, but I'm probably ending up with him a lot because, hey, that's a pocket of the draft where I want to grab wide receiver. I think it's the end of a tier, etc. To your question with regards to like, we'll see. Yeah, I think all the players I'm talking about are all either mid or late round players, because the market is more accurate, more informed, more knowledgeable, more kind of reasonable on the earlier picks. And so I don't think there's as much of an edge as you get to an earlier pick. The other is, if you are willing to take a strong stand on a player early on, that doesn't just mean you're taking a strong stand on that player. You're also taking a strong stand on the players around it, which is far more costly in those early rounds, because if the market is kind of more accurate, adept, those other players, when they do go off, can really hurt you. Versus, I think it was the 9th round last year, there was like one player, and it might have been just Brian Robinson, that had like a positive advance rate. Like it was such a bad round, you were almost better off just anyone from there. And so if you're going to go overweight a player in the mid-late rounds and you miss, it's usually not that costly because kind of everyone's missing in that area. But if you miss a 3rd, 4th, that can tank your team.
Yeah, very good. So we'll move into the running back position. Who's your running back you can't stop drafting?
Running back is, and again, this is probably going to seem like people are maybe surprised because a lot of the market's kind of going the other way. But for me, it's Jaylen Warren. And when I see Jaylen Warren, I think about, okay, first, done some research on third round running backs for the past 15 or so years. And I've kind of measured success is either, hey, they had a success across the season, or they worked their way into a heavy non-injury related role for the end of the season, week 16, week 17, depending on how many weeks that were in that season. And we were seeing success rate of only about 15 to 20%. Now, there's a lot of strong third round running backs in the league, but a lot of them, it took that extra kind of sophomore year until they really had that breakout. And yes, the game is evolving. Yes, we need to account for this specific situation. Caleb Johnson's a perfect fit for that offense, blah, blah, blah. But across a large enough sample, hey, we do need to assess that like 15 to 20% of the time, that's how often we get these successful third rounders. Now, that's not a reason not to draft Caleb Johnson, because in the times that Caleb Johnson does hit, you're playing for that upside, you're playing for that breakout. And so in those worlds, awesome. Okay, Caleb Johnson can still be a good pick. But for me, I want to lean more into the Jaylen Warren, that 80 to 85%. This doesn't mean that Jaylen Warren then becomes an RB1 and wins the season when Caleb doesn't hit, but he's highly, highly likely to actually surpass his value just from the role that we expect him to have from a larger numbers. Now, if we want to get into the micro aspects, I think that Aaron Rodgers signing, I mean, come on. How quickly can you see Caleb Johnson missing a block and Aaron Rodgers saying, get off the field? We also know Aaron Rodgers has a history of being able to support pass-catching running backs. We've seen it everywhere in his career, and Jaylen Warren fits that mode. He is a professional. He's the one who's going to be picking up the blocks. He's the one that's going to be on the field catching the passes. And now we know, I think, like there's a great safety, there's a great median for him. And if we still love him as a player, as we have in the past couple of years, I still think he has that talent. Yes, I'm scared. I don't believe that Pittsburgh wants him to ever be a workhorse or a bell cow, but he doesn't need to be that based off where he's being drafted and the role that he can have.
Yeah, I'm on board. I do see, like, on social media, and a lot of people obviously talking, and in most situations I'm going to be looking at the rookie to come in and, you know, usurp the veteran. But Jaylen Warren has been somebody who's continuously stayed and over the years, like in that 0 RB kind of pocket of the draft, kind of around 8 through 10, and he's back in there again this season, 2 rounds behind Caleb. But I also look at like offenses where you're on about Aaron Rodgers, but you also get like Arthur Smith, who, I'm not a fan of Arthur Smith, but he likes to run the ball quite a bit. And we've seen with Tyler Algier, even when Bijan Robinson came in as a rookie, splitting it between them. So I do think there's a floor there with a Warren pick. I also do see a ceiling with him as well. So I'm very much on board with the Warren selection there. And another part of it is out of this rookie class and where people have ended up, Johnson would not have been one of my favorite profiles out of the class in general. I still think there's a lot of talent there, but I think the path to Warren being involved is very much open. So on board with him as the RB, and I'm going to find it hard not to draft him myself this year. The quarterback position, something that we've been diving into a lot. When we look at ADP this year, you know, for a long time there was like a lot of early quarterbacks when we go back to redraft 10 years ago, and then we talked about, you know, JJ kind of popularized late round quarterback. But now this year we kind of have a tier of elite quarterbacks, and then we have just a QB window from kind of rounds 8 through 13, where that's where all the quarterbacks go. So when we look at QB this year, we talked there a little bit about opportunity cost. Unless you're taking some of these elite quarterback prices, it is very easy to set yourself up in that particular pocket between 10 and 12 and be able to draft whichever quarterback you want. Pick your poison. I don't know if your guy is going to fit into that, but the QB landscape, again, has evolved this year, but it does set up quite nicely as well from the stacking element we talked on the first show, because a lot of these guys you're not having to pay a huge price for. Who's your QB?
Yeah, if I could draft Kevin O'Connell, I wish I could, because what we've been able to do for quarterbacks. But that leads me to JJ McCarthy. And so starting off, I mean, last year, Sam Darnold was QB 8 on the season. And that's Sam Darnold. Like, that's resurgence, or was it more the offense and the Kevin O'Connell aspect? Like, and now we've got JJ McCarthy, who's being drafted as QB 19 this year. And yes, it's a very flat tier, but still, that is a massive, massive gap. And when we look at JJ McCarthy, like, this also isn't a player who, you know, is just going to be a statue in the backfield. I think he ran a 4.48 40-yard dash. I think he had the 6th fastest shuttle cone at the entire combine for his year. Like, this is an agile, quick player. We didn't see him use it as much in college, but that doesn't mean it isn't there. Especially, hey, we've seen younger QBs are more likely to run. And this team playing indoors with Kevin O'Connell, amazing weapons with Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson. I think hey, this is a just very safe with upside play. And the other thing I'll throw in there is with the JJ McCarthy, the stacking options, you've got a lot of options there. And I love that week 17 matchup against Detroit. You've got the domes for the season, but you also are going to get that kind of shootout environment for week 17.
I find his price pretty wild in terms of a rookie who missed the entire season. But I talked about the Shaheed injury. Obviously, he got injured before the season started, so has more time to recover. I also think that because he didn't start last year, it's been factored into his price. He didn't start as a rookie, so that's a downside. But if we look at a lot of the QBs who have come in, if they're early draft picks and they've had success, a lot of them have, gone in and played immediately. But even if we look at how we're talking about Aaron Rodgers, for example, or Jordan Love, but then we look at these guys who have had these resurgences. You mentioned Sam Darnold, then you go to Baker Mayfield. These guys who kind of faded and fell under pressure in that first run as a QB and then have had success after it. I think not playing last season and almost having a red shirt season where you're taking in all the information, you're adapting to the NFL, and you're still part of the team while you're not playing. I think that could turn out to be a net positive for JJ McCarthy and the Vikings rather than a negative of not playing, where he's probably more up to speed with the guys who are in a whirlwind where they're trying to pick up the team meetings, trying to pick up all them and then playing and then being hurt and then rehabbing and then getting back on the field. I think the other part, when we're talking about offenses that you can get these quarterbacks a little bit cheaper, you talked about on the last show, people not wanting to draft the quarterback, maybe for a number of different reasons. If you look at quarterbacks in the NFL, outside of Joe Burrow, probably who has the best weapons that are set up around him and set up for success with the environment of the head coach, then, as you mentioned, in the dome, if you're putting all these together, if JJ McCarthy flops this season, that's all well and good. But if you're saying who's set up for success, he's certainly set up for success. To be going where he is feels a little wild. And when we look through it, I mentioned Jordan Love a moment ago, but that tier quarterback in the 11th and 12th round is Jordan Love, Trevor Lawrence, CJ Stroud, JJ McCarthy. We get Michael Penix in there, but then you get Stafford and Tua as well. There's just I think they're almost too inexpensive at that point, and I can see why you're finding it hard not to draft him. I mentioned the injury concern. Is injury something that you are happy to overlook, or is it just a case with these two particular guys that you're looking to draft that you're kind of they're mispriced by too much that you have to draft them?
I think for a quarterback that we're not even counting on McCarthy from a running angle, it's just not as big of a deal. I think the Shaheed, it was an early enough injury and the reports have found positive. There's definitely guys my biggest issue is if you're a rookie and you've got an issue, like a Luther Burden kind of situation right now with a soft tissue, that kind of stuff scares me because now you're missing the playing time and it's a more recent injury. The Brandon Ayuk one, that's just from a timetable to Chris Godwin, those scare me. But I think the market also kind of accurately reacts to those. So I think those kind of have a risk reward scenario. But for the ones Shaheed and JJ McCarthy, not really baking in much kind of injury risk there.
Yeah, with McCarthy too, I mentioned the players are around it, but if we get reports that he's looking great in outright training camp, and then we get into the preseason and he's out there slinging a couple of balls to Justin Jefferson, if he's playing in the preseason, we're going to get a couple of round jump without even thinking about it in terms of his ADP. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and I think it's really easy to kind of move up the ranks in that. I also already think he should be a couple of rounds. So yeah, very easy.
Yeah, so that's I think he's somebody to definitely buy at this point. I think it'll be more expensive by the time we get closer to the season. Tight end to finish out here. I think you're going to probably follow the role here maybe of some of the mid to late guys, but this year there's some intriguing, I think, rookie tight ends. There's some guys who maybe are ready for a post hype jump, but who are you going with here, tight end?
There's a lot of guys that I think are attractive all the way from the 120s with the David Njoku's all the way to the end of the draft. But I'm going to cheat here and just say hey, 17th, 18th round tight end, because I think that there are a lot of guys right now. And this is particularly, we are in June right now. And if you are drafting right now, you don't really have much confidence on who the RB2s are going to be on the very end of the, this round 17, round 18s.
Yeah.
We don't even know who the starting wide receivers. I mean, hey, we're just seeing like what Dante Thornton's now going to be the starting wide receiver for Vegas. Like, so because our confidence is lower on who those are going to be from the running back, wide receiver, and even when we get that information who it's going to be, it's only going to move them up maybe a round or so. So it's not like these are going to jump up or we're going to miss out on their value. But the tight ends are the ones that, hey, we have a pretty strong idea of starting tight ends in round 18. And I'm going to throw in Juwan Johnson. You're going to pay back to the Saints. We have no more Taysom Hill with his injury. I'm going to throw Theo Johnson. Before his injury last year, actually started looking pretty good. No new competition for the Giants over there. Jatavian Sanders, Tommy Tremble gets his injury. Jatavian Sanders has his sophomore year. We've seen very athletic receiving tight end, can increase there. So like, I think
you're not going to throw in Terrance Ferguson, no?
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, hey, we saw the Rams try to trade up for Brock Bowers the year before. Like we've known. Yeah, sure. I'm a little scared that like this is the successor to Tyler Higbee. But when you think of the Sean McVay offense and the tight end position, Sean McVay, more than any other coach, can say, hey, this is the player that we're going to be targeting this game, and this player is going to win. We saw it a couple years ago when Tyler Higbee had, I think it was like 14 targets or something like that. We've seen years where they even take Cooper Kupp off the field just so they could bring on a third wide receiver just from a blocking, so they could say, hey, we're going to make this a tight end function, just attack the offense. Attack the defense's weakness. And so, yeah, if Tyler Higbee goes, he's old. He's not that great. All he does is just catch and fall. Terrance Ferguson is the opposite. He's actually an offensive weapon. If this is his year, then yeah, Terrance Ferguson, especially second half of the year, could be a big one. And that's a good point, because one thing I kind of alluded to earlier is the tight ends, when I'm drafting late tight ends, I want to be going for upside. I'm not trying to just kind of find the guy that can kind of fall into the end zone. And Theo Johnson, like absolute RAS score specimen. Juwan Johnson, bigger guy, has some speed, a little yak there too. Like these are guys that can actually have some skill sets. Jatavian Sanders as well. So I'm looking for guys that have the ability to kind of have a bit of a breakout. But the truth is, these are the only ones that we actually know from around 18 are going to be starting on their team compared to the other positions.
Yeah, and if we look even athletically at some of the tight ends that are going this year in that particular range, like there's some athletic freaks, and that's kind of what you're touching on there. But you also, one of the things, like Trey McBride a few years ago was one of our big successes, and targeting him, like had a poor rookie season, was stuck behind Zach Ertz even for the start of that second season. But the capability to have some elite traits that can make you a complete difference maker. And I know you've mentioned Njoku a few times. I think the Browns may employ some two tight end stuff this year. They drafted Harold Fanning. He's somebody else who I think fits that category of the upside profile. But yeah, when we're in there, there's quite a few veteran names where I'm just like, yeah, they're not even on my board. But when we look at some of those younger guys that could potentially make leaps, and then I like your note there with McVay. Like you want to get into those exciting offenses where they're going to try and move tight ends around and use them in a multitude of ways. So late tight end, I would encourage people when they do, and I'll get your perspective now. But when we're talking about like these are the players that you want to draft, I'm not advocating to like just bypass tight end completely to this point. Are you comfortable in some of these drafts being like, yeah, I'm just going to pick up 3 tight ends in these last 5 rounds? Or are you trying to get at least, like I would be trying to get somebody probably before Sam Laporta, the 4th tight end, but I'm certainly trying to get somebody prior to round 12 as a tight end before adding another 1 to 2 as we move through the rest of the draft.
Yeah, on Underdog, I'm definitely staying away from elite tight ends this year. But I do like a lot of the tight ends in the David Njoku, Dallas Goedert, Jake Ferguson. So I'd say a lot of times I'll draft 1 in that area, or Colson Loveland, Tyler Warren, draft 1 in that area, and then 2 very late ones in the round 17, 18. But I'm also perfectly content if I ended up my draft with just, hey, 3 of the last kind of 4 or 5 rounds at tight end. We've seen that have success in previous years. And when you want to do it is now, because as we get to July, August, we have more confidence in who are going to be the breakouts, other positions. That's where it's not as kind of functional for me to say, like, the value of that tight end across the other positions isn't as great. But now when we're competing against other people drafting at this point, this is where it's, yeah, if I want to go 3 in the last few rounds, I'm perfectly okay with that, especially on Underdog.
So that is where we're going to get to the end of our 2 conversations for this week's RotoViz Fantasy Football Show. It's been a pleasure having Justin on. Justin, we did talk a little bit in the last show. You mentioned your work over at Establish the Run, but I will give you the pitch again to give a plug to anything that you want, including socials and so on.
Yeah, appreciate it. No, I just find me on Twitter, Justin Herzig, and that's where you can find all my content, all my takes, and a few different projects that we've got going on right now that are coming out. So cool.
And I would recommend as well, I mentioned this at the start of the first show, but you should check out the article that was up on Rolling Stone from Justin. Pretty cool just to track some of his career and then obviously some of the success he's had as a fantasy pro. So that is where we will close it out for this episode. My name is Colm Kelly. You can follow me on social media at Overtime Ireland. And until we are back, have a good one.